gummy bear.
It's the internet. You're busy. Let's do this for July 17th, 2023 for the next hour or so. Let me help you sort through the world of gaming on Game Mess Mornings Live with me, Jeff Grubb. Today, Microsoft's F1 pit crew has sprung into action to make some big changes in preparation for the end of the Activision deal. But first, please join me in welcoming today's co-host to Game Mess Mornings. It's Phil Salvador. Phil, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It is 8 a.m. over here. I've got a mug of tea. I'm ready for this. Hello.
Let's do it. So you work over the Video Game History Foundation, and I was we talked about the news last week of the study you all did, and I want to hop into all of it. But first, like you said, you're a librarian by trade. How'd you find yourself sort of in the world of video gaming?
Right. It's kind of a weird path, right? I've been a game historian for a long time. I've been blogging about weird old games. And as I was going through my career and realizing like, well, there's room for these things to overlap.
Yes.
I happened to be looking for a job at the same time that our co-directors, Frank Cifaldi and Kelsey Lewin, friends of Giant Bomb, realized they needed somebody to sort through their collections. Frank has been amassing this giant collection of game history materials for a long time. And it was like, well, we need someone who knows how to librarian who also understands the subject. So worked out very well. So now I am full-time cataloging our collection, hoping we can actually get it out to people for research fairly soon.
Now, that's something that's close to my heart is providing access to older video games to people for the purposes of education and research. What is the state of that today? Is that something that is easy to provide, or are there a lot of hurdles, in terms of copyright?
Well, the state of it right now is if a library and archive wants to build a game collection, they've got to do the same thing collectors do. They go out and buy a game, put it on their shelf. They have their old hardware they maintain, and that's kind of the state of it right now. It's difficult. There's only a handful of places really building these extensive collections. So if you want to research one, you've got to fly out there, book yourself a week of travel, get your childcare taken care of. The way I've been phrasing it is if you're researching a 100-hour RPG, sitting down in a library reading room and playing it with a controller, just sitting in the room 8 hours a day is the worst possible way to play that game.
Yeah.
So things are pretty dire right now, and a lot of folks in the libraries archives world have been exploring what else can we possibly do to make collections more accessible, which is where our study came in and some of the stuff we've been thinking about.
It is obviously we are in a world it's beyond obvious that it's so silly to say it, that research should primarily be done on the internet where people are. The content should go to them. That is the way to increase the access and to increase education is make it super easy for people to get to. The barriers are that copyright law does make that challenging for an official library like the Video Game History Foundation to do that without getting in legal hot water, right?
Yeah, and that's the issue, is that right now the easiest path is to pirate stuff. And frankly, that's what everyone does. Academics do it, people do it for fun, which, that's not a research purpose. Oh, it could be a research purpose.
Who knows, right? A kid doing it for fun right now is going to be the person making the game in 10 years, and they'll probably look back on that as research. But it's weird, right? Everyone's in that same bucket.
Yeah, and I think there's this issue now where a lot of folks, even in response to our study about how many games you can get nowadays, have said well, I can just pirate things. What's the problem here? And the problem is well, that works now, but I don't think that coolgamezone.ru is going to be on 20 years from now. So what is the legal long-term pathway for this stuff? If we care about this history, what can we do that's not just surrendering it to this illegally murky backwater?
What kind of thought has gone into how the language around the change in regulation, the change in law should be formed so that it does create a space for the Video Game History Foundation or the Internet Archive and doesn't necessarily let us something like coolzone.ru go ham on pirating games?
Well, I'll tell you where it is right now and the very strange issue we have here. So there is a thing every 3 years. It is possible for groups like libraries and archives to petition to get new exemptions to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, specifically for dealing with DRM anti-tampering technology.
Yeah.
There was, the last time we had a cycle, a new exemption was added. A bunch of groups brought it forward. To allow remote access if you have a library with a full-time staff that can provide some kind of secure, controlled access to approved researchers. You can get access to software, but not video games. The law specifically says except video games. Yeah, I see your head. Yeah, if you're wondering what the difference is, the Copyright Office didn't define it either.
Of course.
We like to say it's software if you're not having fun.
Right, exactly. Excel protected, yes.
Yeah, so we can provide access to Excel, but not to like a 30-year-old NES game that's out of print. So for us, it's really like we want to change 3 words in the law right now. We don't even know that we have the technology yet to do this, but it's like we need that flexibility to be able to pursue these kind of things.
Yeah, and that's like where the strategy is right now, is to begin the conversation, right? Like to figure out what is possible, to get the stakeholders at a table and say, hey, this is what we want. We think this is completely reasonable based on historical precedent of how libraries work. What can we do to facilitate that, right? And are these companies, the ESA, are they coming to the table?
So groups like the ESA are showing up to the table, but almost always it's been in opposition of any of the things that we're bringing to the table. The issue, the reason we have that exemption for software, not games, is that the ESA showed up and made what isn't an unreasonable argument, which is that hey, we're re-releasing games all the time. Like we have this thriving market. If libraries are able to come in and kind of essentially publish games on their own, is sort of how they're characterizing it. We lose control of that, and that's hurting our bottom line. So that's why we did the study. Was that it's like, instead of arguing anecdotes, like let's get some numbers. Let's show that like the games that are being put back in the market, it's like a very small portion of the overall, what the medium of video games is.
Yeah, and it's you could see the path to making this all make sense, and it's so enticing, and it's like I mean for me, the exceptions should be obvious. It is the people doing all of the extra work on top to ensure the survivability of all this content and all this history. I think the Internet Archive meets that standard. I think you all meet that standard. But you are going against a lot of companies that have very rigid, turgid views about like what the way that purchasing video games should work, and they don't seem to have a lot of interest in meeting you halfway. Do you have confidence that could like that relationship can be warmed up to a certain point?
I mean, honestly, I hope that's kind of what we could do with this study, because I think what we want to show is that these are complementary efforts. We're not interested in getting in on the market of Sonic. Like, we're not trying to like undermine their sales of Sonic Origins or whatever. Right. We're interested in the things that aren't going to be re-released ever for like, complicated reasons like licensing or emulation is difficult. We had an estimate in there from Stanford that was something like, maybe up to 50% of games from the 90s and earlier are effectively orphaned works where nobody really knows who owns the rights and you can't contact them. It's like that stuff the industry's never going to be able to do. We can do that part of it. It's like if we all care about the history, we should all take different sections of this and work on it. I hope we can have a productive conversation about that. It's still very early in this process, but I hope this is at least eye-opening about how big the scope of this issue is.
Yes, it is to me, and it sounds like I don't know. It sounds like to me you all are the right people to be on the job. You have a plan. Of course, it's a lot of work. This will be the last question, then we'll get into the show. What do you think the timeline is on this, or do you guys even have one? Is it just like this is the next step, and we are marching forward?
Yeah. There is always a fixed timeline. The first kind of petitions go in by the end of the year to the Copyright Office. Then there's the period where they kind of counterfile. The hearings on this start in the spring, and decision is usually made by the end of October. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We have groups like the Software Preservation Network and Harvard Cyber Law are backing us up on this stuff. So we feel good about it. We feel like we've got some good ammunition this time for this discussion.
Thanks, Phil. And thank you, Phil, for bearing with us as we had some technical issues. Audio listeners might not hear it, but he was a real pro. All right, let's get into this mess. And before we do, let's explain what we do here. Most weekdays, I, Jeff Grubb, will help piece your gaming life back together. That includes breaking news and maybe even some of our own original reporting. For all these topics, I'll get the input of a bona fide expert who will make me look smart. If you are watching live on Twitch, welcome. You can always listen to the show later on podcast feeds by searching for Game Mess Mornings or find the RSS on giantbomb.com. You can also catch the show later with chapters and timestamps on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. Okay, we have a lot to get into, so let's start the morning mess with Sony admits defeat and signs Microsoft deal to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation. This is from Ollie Welsh at Polygon. Sony has seemingly recognized the inevitability of Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard going through and has signed an agreement with Microsoft to keep Call of Duty available on PlayStation for the next 10 years. The news was announced on Sunday by Microsoft's gaming head Phil Spencer. And this is a quote. "We are pleased to announce that Microsoft and PlayStation have signed a binding agreement to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation following the acquisition of Activision Blizzard," Spencer tweeted. "We look forward to a future where players globally have more choice to play their favorite games." A Microsoft spokesperson subsequently confirmed to The Verge that the deal would last for a term of 10 years and covers only Call of Duty. Microsoft President Brad Smith also commented, saying, "From day one of this acquisition, we've been committed to addressing the concerns of regulators, platforms and game developers, and consumers. Even after we cross the finish line for this deal's approval, we will remain focused on ensuring that Call of Duty remains available on more platforms and more consumers than ever before." Phil, this is a long time coming. This deal started 18 months ago. And throughout that time, Microsoft's been like, as soon as they realized regulators were going to be pretty tough on them, they immediately were like, "Oh, hey, we'll sign a deal with PlayStation. We'll do it." And PlayStation kind of was, it makes sense. PlayStation says, "No, we're not going to," because deep down they knew Call of Duty wasn't going to get taken off of their platform. But also they're like, "We don't want the deal to go through, so we're going to kind of stand against this." This does seem like the signifier that finally we are here and the deal is going to go through and PlayStation's going to have to figure out this new reality, right?
Yeah, I'm curious from your perspective, like, as this has been an 18-month death march of a story, we're just like every day it's like another tiny detail like gets eked out. Like, it has been interesting for me seeing like all the internal things showing up in court filings. Has this been interesting to cover for 18 months? Because it feels like we're just creeping towards the inevitable at this point.
It's up and down. You know, this is a mostly daily news show, so there are days where it's like the third day in a row and we're basically having the same exact conversation again. And you know, people don't listen every day, so that's fine to a certain extent, but it does feel pretty boring at times. The point where it definitely got interesting, like no argument, it was interesting, is when the court case actually happened and we started getting some discovery that provided a little bit of insight into how these deals actually come together, how these companies actually think, the way that they actually behave. That was something we mostly don't get.
Yeah, the unredacted or failed to redact documents were special. It's interesting that they consider that like a trade secret. It's like, 200 people worked on this game. It's like, oh my God, we can't let that info go out. That's
and that's covering games, right? It's like knowing that these companies are so secretive that they're weird about that sort of thing. So for one thing, actually seeing them redact that, it's like, man, they really do think that way about this stuff. And then there was, some fun tidbits like, $220 million, yes, to make The Last of Us Part 2. It's like, yeah, we kind of knew that, but having the number just written out there, it's like that's pretty interesting. And there's a lot of stuff like that. It is at this point, like, mostly you just want to see the next step so we can get to the next thing. I will miss a little bit, like, getting these tidbits of discovery that did provide those insights. But it was a death march. It does, though, feel like we're here, and that is evidenced by the fact that Microsoft has made a lot of moves over the weekend, seemingly in preparation for all this going through.
Yeah, in the same way that I feel like the political press loves an election year, I feel like the gaming press loves a good lawsuit. So this has been...
And we don't get them that often. Like, there's no guarantee we get one every 4 years. Like, this feels like a once every 10 years sort of thing. I suppose the last one was Epic and Apple, and that one was similarly provided a lot of information as well. But this one it feels a little... Because it's like, these are such gaming companies, and there's so much that they... like. They form so much of the shape of the industry overall. It's Microsoft, it's PlayStation, but it also comes down to these companies always try to avoid this step. They always try to settle out of court and come to an arrangement so they don't have to go to discovery, because that's how important the secrecy is to them. So again, it's been pretty interesting. Now, there is the other side of this deal. So Microsoft and PlayStation have signed a deal that's going to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation going forward for the next 10 years, guaranteed. That is just for Call of Duty, which brings us to the next headline, and we mentioned it a little bit. Microsoft's initial deal for PlayStation was to keep existing Activision console titles, and that's in quote. This comes from Jonas Mackey at Game Reactor. To get to buy Activision Blizzard and convince competition authorities worldwide that it would be beneficial for gamers, Microsoft tried its best to write deals with various companies to guarantee them to get Call of Duty and also other games in the future. Nintendo and Nvidia were two of them who signed this, but Sony refused to. The PlayStation chief Jim Ryan even said during an EU hearing, "I don't want a new Call of Duty deal. I just want to block your merger." As we reported earlier today, Sony has now signed the deal despite all this, which is probably a sign that they have accepted the fact that Microsoft will get to buy Activision Blizzard. But as noticed by The Verge editor Tom Warren, this is not the same deal Sony reportedly got offered late last year. It seemed like it was more beneficial for Sony short term, as it granted all existing Activision console titles on Sony, including future versions of Call of Duty franchise or any other current Activision franchise, on Sony through the December 31st, 2027. Now this has changed to 2034 instead, but it only includes Call of Duty, which potentially means that new titles and franchises like Crash Bandicoot, Diablo, Spyro, StarCraft, or Tony Hawk could potentially skip PlayStation. I'll say that it's hard to tell like what is a better deal here, because Call of Duty is such a moneymaker for PlayStation that's probably the only thing that they truly care about. And if they miss out on the next Crash Bandicoot, oh well. I think it's probably how they feel. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, I just saw someone in chat say a new Tony Hawk, like LOL. Yeah, it's like I feel like a lot of people are focusing on a lot of the legacy names that it's like, yeah, that's not as big of a driver. I don't know how sales for something like Diablo broke down, but yeah, like I think, and this is where I think we'll talk about this more today too, but I feel like we're entering this era where companies realize like, yeah, we can make a lot of money by having our live games live across multiple platforms. And so when it comes to like, what are they going to make exclusive? Like maybe Spyro, like, sure, I guess. That doesn't seem like as big of a driver anymore, as we see like Sony focusing more on live service games and all that.
Yeah. And it's, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2 was the best selling Tony Hawk game ever, which is kind of wild considering the history of that game being such a, this world beater when it first came out. But even that's like not really enough to move the needle to the point where Activision Blizzard under its own accord was like, well, then we're definitely going to make Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4. It's like, no, that team now works on Diablo 4 and they're not even a team anymore. They just are Blizzard. We're not going to make another one of those. Are you kidding? I think that Microsoft, of course, is incentivized with Game Pass to put a variety of stuff out, and they will use a lot of these IP. But at the end of the day, the thing that Sony was worried about here was revenue. It's also worried about Microsoft's bargaining power when they sit down together and they have chats about like, okay, I need this, and that involves you. And Microsoft goes, well, we have Call of Duty, so we have the ultimate like trump card here. That's past though. They have to deal with that going forward. They're just going to have to deal with that. So the other thing they were worried about is the revenue from Call of Duty, which is massive. And this deal protects that for 10 years. That's worth more to them than Crash Bandicoot and a new Tony Hawk. Lol.
Yeah, I was talking with someone the other day about how weird it is that like this includes everything from like, Sierra's back catalog, which is an incredible amount of stuff. But yeah, I don't think the skies aren't crashing down because King's Quest will be on one less platform if that ever happens. Like, yeah, so it's interesting to see. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's as they're prioritizing that kind of constant stream of live service revenue. It's not that different from Sony buying Bungie and Destiny staying on PlayStation. It's like, yeah, that's how you make money. It's like.
I just think of the funny idea of like, oh, Sony signs deal to keep PlayStation or keeps Call of Duty on PlayStation and also King's Quest and maybe Police Quest, just those three actually.
Yeah, it's like Jim Ryan was like a big Leisure Suit Larry fan. That was his one carve out. He was like, not unless we get this one. This is what's important to me.
That's what I need. I need it. All right. Microsoft is about to become the most important third party on PlayStation. This comes from Jonas Maki at Game Reactor as well. Late Sunday, we reported that Sony had signed a 10-year Call of Duty deal with Microsoft, securing the series on PlayStation up until 2034. This has generally been viewed by analysts as Sony caving and accepting that Microsoft will get to buy Activision Blizzard, with pretty much all obstacles seemingly removed. While it will likely take many years before we get to see any real consequences from the enormous merger of Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, video game journalist Stephen Totillo, who usually covers the business side of our beloved industry, now points out an interesting fact. Microsoft is about to become the biggest and thus most important third party on PlayStation. The reason is simple, as he explains. In 2022, the most downloaded PS5 game in the US was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. The most downloaded PS4 game was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. The third most downloaded PS4 game was Minecraft, something Microsoft acquired years ago. This makes it easy to see why Sony has been such a strong opponent to the deal and tried to stop it in every way possible. And that goes back to, this gives Microsoft enormous power when, 2-3 years ago from now, they do sit down and they start talking about, okay, Microsoft says, hey, we want to increase revenue split for this because we have Call of Duty. Now that might not be possible because of the agreement they signed. But if you 10 years from now, then when they sit down at the table, it's like Call of Duty, Minecraft, we have these things. We want to keep doing stuff with your system. But in order to do so, you need to let us have people sign into Xbox Live on PlayStation, and you need a version of Game Pass on there. And Sony previously never, ever would have considered that. Now they have to at least consider that. I still don't think that they get there, but this moves everything a little bit closer to a world that is in the same form as I think Phil Spencer imagines it, and less what Jim Ryan imagines it. So, yeah, Microsoft's power on PlayStation is notable here. Do you think that that's going to be something that we feel sooner rather than later, or is it going to take some time?
That seems like a switch they would start flipping 10 years from now.
Yeah.
I think they've even said in their court filings, like the brand damage if they just like suddenly made everyone get an Xbox Live login or like started closing things off is tremendous. I think it was also interesting, and I forget who or when this point was raised, about the idea that, now that they have 10 years, if Sony is making like a dozen live service games right now, like they have time to build their own Minecraft or their own Call of Duty, if that's really a concern. I don't see a world where they cut this stuff off because, again, it's like, why, if you're making so much money on your less popular Xbox console or whatnot, why would you cut off this beautiful revenue stream coming from PlayStation? Like, it is interesting that we're starting to enter that world where it's like, for something like this, maybe like exclusives are making less and less sense unless it's like a big cinematic event like The Last of Us, or to a lesser degree Halo Infinite or something to that extent.
Yeah, and I think it's what makes Sony's push into live services. You said that's those 12 games, a lot of money going into that. So interesting. What does that look like? Are they just coming out on PlayStation and PC? Almost certainly they're coming to PC, but is there a world where they also launch them simultaneously on mobile? And it's like, is it on everything except for Xbox? That's kind of weird too. There's millions of people on Xbox who are willing to spend money on that kind of thing, and a live service game needs as many of those kinds of people as possible. So it's like, how is Sony viewing a future where it has a live service success? But we like you said, they are spending a lot. They just announced on last week that they have like $2.1 billion in research and development going directly into live service games and what that looks like. And it's like they already purchased Bungie. And that the idea there from the very beginning was, we're going to bring in that expertise to help us figure out what our live service strategy looks like. I think the extra money on top of that is, let's take those ideas and see how we can apply them to a bunch of different genres and game types, and see if we can make the next big live service game out of nowhere instead of just replicating what's worked before. So Sony has strategies here. It's just going to it's going to take some time for them to implement it. And, live service games, like any game, it's a hit-driven business. Many of them are going to fail.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered what you were saying earlier about how Sony is doing these things in terms of the ecosystem. Like, Microsoft has been kind of upfront for years about they're pursuing this kind of console-less, platform-less idea of gaming.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't follow Sony as closely. I don't know if they have a similar perspective or if it still is about selling people PlayStation 5s.
They definitely want to sell people PlayStation 5s. They've explicitly said that. Their moves, I mean, I think Jim Ryan in like the last couple of months said something right along those lines of, it's about getting people on PS5. Now, I still think that shifts a little bit if they get a big live service success, and that thing needs to be everywhere. I see a world where a successful live service Sony game is just on your phone, on TVs, just everywhere. The way that any of those games work. I mean, Fortnite is the model. Now, Fortnite is not something you could just replicate, but maybe it's Apex Legends is the model, something that feels attainable in the world. Maybe Fortnite isn't attainable. Yeah,
and maybe it's the kind of thing where if they have a success that's big, maybe that then changes their strategy, where it's like, oh, now we should start thinking beyond just hardware sales. But we're not at that point yet, because those 12 things don't exist in this world currently.
So we talked a lot about how all this is affecting PlayStation and how they're going to react to this. Meanwhile, over at Microsoft, they are putting pieces on the board in a certain position to just move as soon as this deal closes. They are doing it all at once. Some things that might be might have been big headlines on their own are now just relegated to like the third or fourth story today. Xbox Live Gold, games with gold, finally being phased out in favor of Xbox Game Pass Core. This comes from Eddie McCooch at GameSpot. Microsoft has announced a new version of Xbox Game Pass that will replace Xbox Live Gold and confirmed that Games with Gold program is ending later this year. Xbox Game Pass Core is a new offering that costs $10 a month or $60 a year. That's the same price as Gold, and comes with a collection of 25 plus games on Xbox Series X and S and Xbox One. The program launches on September 14th with games like Gears 5, Hellblade, Senua's, I can never say that. Senua's Sacrifice, thank you. Grounded, Halo 5, Inside, and Elder Scrolls Online in the library. After that, new titles will be added 2 to 3 times per year. You can see a list of all the confirmed Xbox Game Pass core titles below. But note that Microsoft will announce more of the catalog before the offering goes live in September. For a couple of years now, I've been mentioning to people that Xbox Live Gold going away has always been on their roadmap. They were always looking to phase it out, but they never really fully knew what that was going to look like a couple of years ago. And this was prior to Halo Infinite coming out, a free-to-play game that they were going to have to shift things around because they were going to have this big free-to-play live service game, and then they were going to charge people to play it. And were they really going to pull the trigger on that? And it turned out by that time, no, they didn't. They made free-to-play free without having to have Xbox Live Gold. The other side of that is, okay, well, then what do you do with the rest of Xbox Live Gold? They were never in a world where they were going to stop charging people for multiplayer. Not really. It was just like, how are they going to shift this up and transform it so they can stop thinking about Gold in any real way and instead just have people focus on Game Pass? Here it is. This makes some sense. I think it's still a little weird, specifically because now you get online multiplayer for this smaller tier, this $10 tier of Xbox Live Core, or sorry, Game Pass Core. But if you get console Game Pass for $10 per month, or maybe I think they raised the price on that. I think maybe it's $11 per month. You don't get online multiplayer. So that's strange and feels like something they need to address. But otherwise, again, this is part of the upsell. This is always the kind of the direction they were going to go, right?
Yeah, the online multiplayer thing, I was thinking about that with Halo Infinite too. I saw someone in chat was talking about me ragging on Halo Infinite. I love that game. I played a ton of it in multiplayer. But it was a case where I realized, like, oh, wait, I haven't paid for Xbox Gold for years. And it's like, I'm getting a lot out of this. It feels like jaywalking laws at this point, where it's like, technically you have to pay for multiplayer, but the things people want to play, it's like those are all kind of going the free-to-play route. So yeah, practically, I don't know what difference it'll make. But yeah, it feels like they have been in the process of kind of figuring that out and kind of sunsetting that for a long time. So this feels inevitable. And
it, like, again, let's look through the prism of what is happening. They got Call of Duty. They're going to put it in Game Pass. That stuff's going to get added to, like, the older games are going to get added to Core here. And to play those games online, you will need online multiplayer pass. Yeah. You will have to pay for that. So it's like, I could see them just like, this is a way to move the needle on Game Pass and get people in that ecosystem and getting them moving up the tier list. And we'll get them, later this year, put the older games into Core, and we can't put the new Call of Duty game into Game Pass because Sony still has the deal, and their contract's going to prevent that. But the year after that, a lot of these people are going to be in Core or something along those lines to play these older Call of Duty games. Let's offer them the new one if they just pay a little bit more per month, and there we go. Now they're moving up the tier list. So the strategy is pretty evident, right?
Yeah, and I wonder almost from a marketing angle, they've talked about how Game Pass is supposed to, people will say like, oh, here's this game I've never thought of. Let me try that. I wonder if the idea of this, if they will market it as like, here's the Call of Duty pass. By the way, here's a thing called Grounded. Have you heard of this? And onboarding people that way to then, upgrade them to whatever the next tier is and so on and so on. Right. I wonder if they'll explicitly do that.
And I think, we always hear, oh, there's so many people who only play Call of Duty, but there's going to be a certain probably significant percentage of Call of Duty players who are interested in other games and can be convinced to get into that ecosystem. And that, a small percentage of a really big number is a lot of people, something again that can move the needle for Game Pass. So getting them involved in the network effect of Game Pass, of you come in here, you play with your friends, everyone knows that we have Game Pass because that's basically, we already got that to play online multiplayer in Call of Duty. So I know that you have this game as well. Let's just recommend tonight. Let's all go play that game for a little bit because it's in Game Pass. And that creates it creates stronger bonds of people like, we know we go to Xbox to play these games together. It's just a really powerful tool in Microsoft's, a tool belt now for getting people involved in their ecosystem. And you can see how they're going to deploy it. And they have already begun. They've already started making these moves. I don't know if they've listed all 25 games so far that are going to be in core. We mentioned some. I think they said they're going to announce some more before. Yes. Today we're confirming the following titles for launch, with more to be announced in advance of September 14th. So the full list that they've announced so far is Among Us, Descenders, Dishonored 2, Doom Eternal, Fable Anniversary, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, Forza Horizon 4, Gears 5, Grounded, Halo 5 Guardians, Halo Wars 2, Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, Human Fall Flat, Inside, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Psychonauts 2, State of Decay 2, and the Elder Scrolls Online Tamriel Unlimited. So that's not 20, that's like in the high teens. So they'll probably have a handful more here to announce soon. All right. Other Call of Duty games on Xbox see huge player growth, and here is why. This comes from Joseph Yadin at GameSpot. Players have recently flocked to older Call of Duty games on Xbox 360, including Modern Warfare 3 and Black Ops 2. Despite these games being over a decade old, the communities are still thriving thanks to a recent change to the matchmaking. On July 12th, players reported that the matchmaking, which previously disallowed users from joining matches, was suddenly fixed. Players then shared videos of them finally joining matches across older Call of Duty games. Prior to the fix, these older games were practically unplayable online due to the matchmaking issues. According to Charlie Intel, a Call of Duty fan site, Black Ops 2 had over 10,000 players on Xbox 360 this weekend, following the matchmaking fix. Likewise, Modern Warfare 3 had over 7,000 active players on Xbox 360. I saw some numbers of Black Ops 1 had over like 100,000 players this past weekend, and then Modern Warfare 3 got up to around 76,000 players or something like that. So people were very excited to go back to these older Call of Duties. And again, this feels like one of those things where Activision sees that the deal's closing and they know that these games are going to get put in the Game Pass soon. So let's get those servers up and running, ready to go. And here it is. And a lot of people are still excited about older Call of Duty games. Not too surprising, right?
And this, to bring it back to our study for a quick second, because as we were thinking about, about like, how we are, the case we're making about, we want to make sure these things are available. One of the things we heard was this kind of a concern within the industry about like, does having back catalog games available, kind of cannibalize sales or interest in other titles? Like, does having, FIFA 16 make people not want to buy the newer, I guess it's not FIFA anymore, but, that sort of thing. I think it's interesting. I would be interested to see what the knock-on effect is here. If people going back to play an older Blops title, if that then leads them to play Warzone, to like download that for the first time, maybe. Like, I'm wondering what the chain is there, because it seems like this would be like, for the brand of Call of Duty, I mean, everyone has their own favorite, but this seems like, rising tide, all boats go up. Yep.
Yes. I always wonder, like, I remember I talked to, I've told this story on the show before, people have to just bear with me. I talked to an old Netflix executive and I said, hey, I mentioned games. Like, this is before they were ever doing anything with video games, like 10 years ago, more than that. And he said that games age quicker. An older game from 3, 4, or 5 years ago feels really old. And so it's not worth, like, it makes the business model not work for us as well, because people aren't ready. They aren't willing to pay monthly for something that came out that long ago. And so us keeping all those games doesn't make sense. And again, this is them shipping discs. That's definitely changed, right? Where games from 5 to even 10 years ago now don't feel that much different than games from today. And so leveraging those libraries to, as this big selling point seems more viable than ever before, right?
Yeah, and purposely, when we did the study, we even curtailed it to games before 2010. That struck me as the era when it's like, oh, companies realize that there is money in backwards compatibility, that you can keep selling these things, that people will always be buying, Halo Master Chief Collection to be able to play Halo 3. Like, those games are feeling evergreen in a way that, like, PS2 generation and back didn't necessarily. I don't think I had anything else to add to that except yes.
Yes, agreed. Yep. A couple things. Turbo Sean mentioned in chat that the player count numbers have previously been bugged for Call of Duty games, so who knows how accurate those in-game numbers actually are. And
it's one guy playing 20,000 characters at once. And,
exactly. Right. That
should not be counted.
Man, I'm pretty impressive. But yeah, that's just what he loves to do. And then apparently the servers coming back on for these older games did break the server for the new Modern Warfare 2 game for a couple days as well. So that's how it works. That just sounds like video games right there. Okay, let's move on here. Last of Us Part 2 remaster seemingly outed by composer Gustavo Santaolalla. And this is from Michael Haradens from PSU. Naughty Dog is working on The Last of Us Part 2 remastered, according to composer Gustavo Santaolalla, who worked on the score for both The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2. Speaking in a Spanish interview, Santaolalla touched on the in-game version of himself in The Last of Us Part 2, telling the interview that I'm the new version of the game. I'm in the new version of the game that you can go up to him and request certain songs. However, he makes it clear that he can't say anything else on the matter. Naughty Dog hasn't announced The Last of Us Part 2 remastered, although the topic of a native PS5 version of the post-apocalyptic sequel has been doing the rounds ever since Sony's latest console hit the market. This sounds like something that's right along the lines of Sony's strategy of, we have these big properties, we have these big successful games, and we make movies and we make television shows, and we've made a successful 24 Emmy nomination show in The Last of Us, and we are going to have a second season of that. And when we do, we want another game on the shelf for people to buy. And why wouldn't that be The Last of Us Part 2 remastered for the PlayStation, for the shiny new PlayStation 5 that many of these people bought to play The Last of Us remaster that we put out, remake that we put out recently? It kind of lines up, right? That I could see them doing this. What do you think?
It's interesting that it's being framed as a different product, as opposed to on Xbox, you have, you buy this game and it's going to work across X many generations. Yes. Versus this is an entire new thing. It feels weird, like thinking about it in terms of, they're just putting out a PS5 version. It's like, sure, that makes sense, charge the same amount. Thinking about it as a separate product, as a remaster, feels weird. It's like, I don't know how many years it's been, but it's not been that long. It feels like, I don't know what the shortest turnaround is from original product to like remastered edition of a product, but this feels very fast to be thinking about it as like a new edition of the game.
Real quick correction on the name, Santaolalla. There we go, Santaolalla. Okay. Thank you, Norin Games. There we go, got it. Yeah, it is strange. This is how Sony does it, right? Though that they they have had upgrade paths. They've had a few games early on in the PlayStation 5 generation where they're like, we are going to have cross-gen stuff. And if you buy the PS4 version, we're going to charge you $10 extra. There was some pushback on that. And they're like, okay, never mind. We're just going to, if you buy the PS4 version, we'll give you the PS5 version for free. But that had like a hard end date. And I can't remember when that was, but it had to do with Horizon or something like that. And then it's like everything after this, if it's, cross-gen or it's an update of an older game, you're either going to have to buy it again, or maybe there will be an upgrade path, but it'll be a paid upgrade path.
I wonder if it's not a marketing thing. I'm thinking about the example when like JCPenney got rid of sales for a long time. They're like, everything's just going to be like 20% cheaper all the time. And people got upset, where it's like, if you're selling, this works on Xbox, but also Series X, and you download the, the Flex version or whatever, versus just saying, now you can buy The Last of Us on PlayStation 5. I wonder if that just makes more sense to people in terms of selling them the thing.
I wonder if people saw me pop because I've definitely referenced that JCPenney thing like at least like half a dozen times on this show before, about how that was like a weird business phenomenon of like, hey, they made everything simple and flattened the prices, and everything was so clear and color coded that you didn't have to go searching for deals. And it's like, turns out people really like searching for deals, and makes it feel like they're getting one over on the company, and that's what makes the whole thing go round. So yeah, it's I don't know, that's fun. I'm glad you referenced that. All right, let's see where we are at. Gaming handhelds like the Switch and the Steam Deck will need to have replaceable batteries by 2027. This comes from Chris Brandrick at Overkill WTF. Newly adopted European Union regulation has outlined how all devices sold by 2027, including those found in gaming handhelds, will need to have a user replaceable battery. This regulation, adopted by the European Council just this week, aims to strengthen sustainability practices around the entire life cycle of a range of portable batteries, and this includes right to repair powers for end users. So what does this mean for gaming devices? Well, this EU law, on paper at least, suggests that portable gaming handhelds sold within the EU, such as the Steam Deck, the Asus ROG Ally, and Nintendo Switch, would need to have removable batteries. Overkill spoke directly with an EU source who confirmed that yes, the batteries of gaming handhelds are covered by the batteries and waste batteries regulation. Of course, it's worth noting that this regulation would likely only apply to new products, so it's more accurate to say that this could impact a new Nintendo Switch 2 or a follow-up Steam Deck, for example. The lengthy regulation document outlines how any device brought to market that has a battery needs to ensure that the batteries, quote, are readily removable and replaceable by the end user at any time during the lifetime of the product. It goes on to state that a portable battery shall be considered readily removable by the end user, where it can be removed from a product with the use of commercially available tools without requiring the use of specialized tools unless provided free of charge with the product. This is the kind of thing that I think most people are like, this is what regulators should be doing. Now, I think it was the regulators getting in the way of the Activision Microsoft deal was very useful. And in the end, we got a ton of great information and we got insight into how that worked. And it provided an understanding that I think a lot of people can feel more comfortable about this deal going through because things were vetted and we got in there, we got the nitty gritty, and we know it's like, okay, it's going to look like this probably. And Microsoft had to make a lot of caveats. So I think like the FTC did its job and the CMA did its job. But when I think about like what regulators should be doing, right to repair is like number one. This kind of thing is so important. How does this move you?
So I'm going to be a weirdo. I'm probably going to get destroyed in chat. I have never owned a Switch, and it's various reasons. But one of the reasons is like I have just thought about like, well, what happens in 3 years? Like that thing, the battery life is going to be terrible on that thing.
Sure.
I look at just my phone, and like that's part of what's been holding me back on. Honestly, it's like, if I just use the thing while traveling, if I keep it like plugged into a dock forever, and then like I bring it on a plane, the battery life is totally dead. Like, I don't know. It feels like that takes a lot of the point out of it. So, and someone else just mentioned Joy-Con drift and Joy-Con battery life. Like there's a lot of factors like that. So moving in that direction is great for, I think companies often get concerned about like the right to repair means they won't be able to sell replacements, but it's like, that's a good thing for consumers. I would be more willing to buy a product knowing that I could extend its life instead of just being like, well, I got to throw these earpods out in 5 years. And that's kind of the lifetime on that thing.
Yeah. I just watched a video about light bulbs from Technology Connections on YouTube, and he talked about how the cartel that set the 1,000 hour lifetime limit on light bulbs actually was doing that for good reasons based on physics for the most part. And obviously they set prices in ways that were illegal in other ways, but in terms of limiting the lifetime of a battery, or I'm sorry, of a light bulb, they're like, it actually makes sense because it's the most efficient while getting the best quality light and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay, having it laid out for me like that, it's like, that makes sense. In terms of a battery and a device, though, we know what's going to happen with those, and they can do the best in terms of efficiency and quality of the battery and all that stuff. And then also on top of that, make it easy for us to replace it so that we can have a say in the matter. And I'm with you. I got a new PlayStation, this one right here, this fucking piece of shit right here. I bought this thing for $70 from Amazon. I really like the look of it. The battery came basically broken. It doesn't charge really. And it's charged like a couple times. Most of the time it just doesn't work. And I've tried a million cables, everybody. I've tried a million ports. The controller battery's broken. I could send it to Amazon. I could get it replaced. Sony it's probably under warranty. But mostly I would just like to swap out the battery and make it work myself. That's what I would want. And it's like, I kind of get a little gun shy about buying another one of these because it's like, man, the next one's probably not going to come with a bum battery, but it is a lithium ion battery and it does have a limited life. So I am going to be in a world where this controller is going to be useless unless I pry it open using specialized tools. And I bought an iFixit kit and all that stuff, but that is not my natural. I'm not great at that stuff. Prying these things open, I always end up breaking something, and I hate doing that. And then it's like I'm left with this. I did that with the Switch. I tried to fix the fan on one of my first generation of Switches, and I went in there and I got the fan in, and I broke the cartridge slot, the card slot. And now that doesn't work anymore. And so I kind of have this like pile of Switch parts just laying in a drawer back there.
to go with the light bulb analogy, it's like when your light bulb burns out, you don't have to buy a new house. Like you can go in and replace the thing. Yeah,
with a very cheap product. So it's like, it's a consumable good. It's a small little thing, right?
Yeah, and it seems this feels inevitable with the direction that a lot of right to repair stuff has been going. I've been happy to see it hitting phones more, or even like I think even some of the new, I want to say Surface models have it easier to replace the battery. I can't remember for sure. I may be making that up and misremembering something, but this feels like an inevitability, especially as we, if the Switch continues to be whatever the Switch 2 is, if it's still that sort of hybrid console, like that seems necessary.
And I mean, the early days of phones, I mean, I was never an iPhone guy, but I know on Android, most of my early phones, I could replace the battery. And it was just like, 6 months in, 9 months in, like a year in. Back then we kept our phones longer. So like a year or two later, I would have this thing. It's like, oh, the battery's noticeably worse. I'll just buy a new battery for it's like $25 and I swap it in and now we're good to go again. And it's like, it just slid off. And that was like part of like how you used it, was like you just knew the back could just slide off, and you take the battery off and you put an SD card in to expand the storage and all that stuff. And that stuff has gradually become rarer and rarer. So I'm glad that EU has done a lot of good stuff with this, forcing Apple to go with USB-C going forward, standardized port, and then this on top of that. Like, these are good moves backed up by a strong right to repair movement that is getting in the ears of these regulators and saying this is what we need, and it seems like overall it's a pretty good thing.
From a preservation perspective, I'm imagining some nightmare scenario where like they make EU versions of the Switch 2 that have like a replaceable battery and not in the US. So people are like, oh, you got to get the European version, then you have to jailbreak if you want the best Switch. It's like, no, please just give us the one that the Europeans have too, please.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. that is entirely possible. Usually these companies, though, they like when they have a major territory like that does things one way, they just flatten. They're like, okay, we'll just do it that way everywhere. But it's not impossible that they just have a European only Switch that has all these features in it. All right, last story here. Planets in Star Wars Outlaws are similar in size to 2 Assassin's Creed Odyssey zones. We'll try to figure out what this means together, everybody. This is from Darren Bonthus at GameSpot. The first open world Star Wars game is on the way from Ubisoft, but just how open are those worlds? According to developer Massive Entertainment, Star Wars Outlaws will feature several handcrafted planets to explore, each one being roughly the size of 2 zones in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's a crude analogy, and this is a quote now, everybody, but the size of one planet might be about equivalent to two of the zones in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, for example, creative director Julian Garrigy said to Edge magazine. It could be 2 to 3 zones, but it's not, this sort of epic, the whole of England recreated approach. It's not clear yet as to just how many planets will be available to explore in Star Wars Outlaw, but Garrigy added that Massive is looking to emphasize open-ended gameplay inside each planetary zone. I played a little bit of Odyssey, and these zones were pretty big. They were, this is weird. Like Redfall. If anyone played Redfall, it was like bigger than the map of Redfall. No one played that. But they're basically it's gonna be pretty big. It's gonna feel like each of these planets is its own open world map to a certain extent. And there's gonna be plenty to do in there. You a Star Wars fan? Is this game sound exciting to you, Phil?
Moderately. I've never been a huge open world person just because I feel like it's very easy to subscribe to that, like, Ubisoft fatigue syndrome, where it's like, here's a map and here's 500 million things to do. So I kind of like the idea of, instead of trying to make a 50 square mile map that's just a billion icons, it's like, here's these slightly smaller zones where you can, there are a lot of things to do, but you're not just like thrown into, the entirety of England. I think it would be neat to see more open world design go that way. I think there's a lot of merit in having, more focused level design instead of just an endless open expanse. So it's a good format, having discrete planets as opposed to having to come up with some arbitrary, here's the containment zones where you can and can't go sort of a scenario.
Yeah, for me, it is definitely the pick a lane, right? Don't try to go down the middle. Don't try to be we think we want to have these big open places, but we're not sure. And it's like, either have it become so massive that it would be absurd to suggest anyone play all of it, like Starfield. Like, that's why I'm excited about Starfield, because 1,000 planets and all this stuff. It's like, okay, clearly I'm supposed to just find my story in that big open place, and the story is not, I 100% of that game. The Ubisoft games a lot of times are in this weird place of like, well, they're showing me all these icons. I feel like I should be checking off all these icons. It is a checklist game. It's a map game where I need to be clearing out the map. And I think Ubisoft saying, no, we're going to have this contained scale. It's not the whole of England. They're going to be pretty big zones. We want it to feel open. If you still want to play it like, I'm going to go find my story in this big open world, you could probably do that. But for the most part, it is going to be somewhat restrained. I agree with you. Like, that is the other way to do it. Don't give me this one that's like wishy-washy in the middle, though.
Yeah. Curious to see what that looks like, but yeah.
Same. Absolutely. All right. Let's see here. We had a poll from yesterday. Let's see if I can get this in here without breaking anything. All right. Is Indiana Jones important? Yes or no? 46% said yes. 54% said no. This happened a couple of years ago where I would bring up Indiana Jones, and every person who was like under 30 would be like, I've never seen that. Obviously, that's extreme. A lot of people under 30 have seen Indiana Jones, but they definitely do not care about it in the way that I just assumed people cared about Indiana Jones. And so I think we're seeing with the new movie not performing nearly as well as Lucasfilm and Disney probably expected. That's clearly the case. It's not like some Top Gun thing where secretly people were pining for a sequel and it's going to be this massive world success. And of course, maybe the quality between those two movies has something to do with it. But there's an Indiana Jones game coming out, And I wonder if maybe that can do you think it can work that other way, Phil, where a game can get people excited about an IP and maybe bring people back into it, or do you think they have to bring in some love for Indiana Jones to care about the game?
I mean, it's all dependent on the character, right? Like if you're saying there's an Indiana Jones game coming out and people don't care about the character Indiana Jones, like I don't know how much you can do with that. Versus like Star Wars, that means many things to many different people. That means, it can be something like Outlaws. It can be a racing game. There's so many ways you can explore. Indiana Jones is synonymous with one person and one actor. And like, I feel like if you don't have an affinity for that, there's only so far you can go in that direction. I don't know how you get people to care about it if they don't already.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough road to hoe to figure that out. But, if the game is good, I think that solves a lot of your problems right there. People will show up for a good game, and then maybe they give a shit about Indiana Jones when it's all said and done, or maybe they're like, that was just a good game, when's the next one coming out? And either way, I think that's probably good for the game studio at the very least. All right, we have a new poll question that I'm going to put up here in a second. In the meantime, though, Phil, why don't you tell people where they can find you on the internet, where they can find more about the 87% project that you guys are working on right now, and all that good stuff?
Yeah. Well, we have a nice little landing page for everything we have on our project, gamehistory.org/87%, percent spelled out like a word. And that's where we have, our very brief, kind of rundown of it. And then you have a more detailed explainer if you want to get into the nitty gritty. And then you can go to like the whole 50-page report if you really want to get into that stuff. Otherwise, right now I'm on Twitter for the time being. My God. But I'm on there at It's the Shadsy, which... you can just search for Phil Salvador. You'll find me there.
You'll find him.
You'll find me that way. But yeah, otherwise hanging on there while things are still falling apart. But continuing to do this game preservation stuff. Hopefully next couple months we'll be able to open up some of the cool things we have in our library. Lots of really interesting behind the scenes things we can't wait to share. It
is good stuff that you all are doing over there. Also, man, Twitter just feels so weird these days. Like someone mentioned that I follow, so like, I'll get on here and I'll start tweeting and I'll look around and be like, oh yeah, that's right. Most of the people left and it feels like a bar at 4 a.m. It's like, yeah, it really does feel like a bar at closing time, and it's kind of miserable and bizarre. And for some reason you're still there and you can't look around. You can't quite figure out why.
I don't realize till too late. It's like, oh, the people I was talking with on here aren't here anymore.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is strange.
I went to the bathroom and I came back and now it's a different crowd in here and I don't know about it, everybody. All right, the new poll for Wednesday. We're going to do Bombcast tomorrow. We'll be back with the Game Mess mornings on Wednesday, Are you going to spend time playing older Call of Duty games if they get added to Game Pass? Yes or no? We'll discuss that on Wednesday. Maybe by Wednesday we'll have more information. Microsoft was talking to the CMA today on a judge. So maybe the deal will close today. Maybe it won't. Either way, it feels like it's on its way. So maybe we'll have more to talk about with all that.
Well, yeah. The story's over, so we'll have an official ending in, let's say, November. Let's give it until we get this thing done.
Exactly. Phil, thank you so much for spending today talking about video games, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this was great.
And everybody, you're the best audience in gaming. More stuff on Giant Bomb this week. We might be doing a watch party. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Some other things are happening. We'll do a Blight Club. Will continue for sure with the menace that is known as Grubb. I don't approve of his methods, but he's got a video game to play. So look out for all that. Until next time, everyone, have a good one. Take care of yourself, and goodbye.